Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to folks who are not on the East Coast. Very excited about this webinar today. My name is 𝗕𝗲𝘀𝗂, and I wanted to start out with a fun fact about myself. I am a lifelong vegetarian, but when it comes to Investor Day presentations, boy, I love myself some steak and sizzle. So yeah, that's what we will be talking about in the next 30 minutes, how you can think about incorporating this concept of steak and sizzle, right? How you can have a meaty content as well as a great experience, great sizzle to get the most out of your Investor Day results. We have kept this webinar for 30 minutes, so I'm going to stay more high level. I want to cover fewer but meatier topics, and my intention is that you all walk away with a few ideas that you can apply in your next Investor Day, especially when it comes to planning for your Investor Day presentations. Let's get started. A little bit about myself. My name is 𝗕𝗲𝘀𝗂𝗂. I run a design agency, a presentation agency called OUTKREATE, where we specialize in creating presentations for public company IROs. We work with some really cool IROs. We enjoy working with them. Over the last 18 months or so, we've been part of several Investor Day events, and we've had a lot of learnings. So everything we share with you is based on real life learning, working with public company IROs, similar to all of you on the audience. Let's get started. As we all know, it takes a lot, right, to make an Investor Day a successful Investor Day. If I am an IRO and I am planning an Investor Day 3 to 6 months from now, I'm thinking of these 4 key work streams. Number 1 is getting your main message, right? Nailing your main message for your Investor Day. What do you want your audience to walk away with? Number 2, figuring out the story and content, essentially your presentation that delivers your main message. Number 3, getting your leadership team to be ready to help them deliver the main message. And number 4, there's 1,000 things that go behind executing an event like this. So there's a lot that goes on there. For today's purpose, and since the first 2 steps are heavily tied to presentation, I'm going to focus on just the first 2 steps. All right, let's dive in. Let's now start talking about this concept of steak and sizzle, right? Let's define, right? What do I mean by steak? So when we say steak, it's really the content of your Investor Day presentation. It's the substance of your investor story. And when I say sizzle, it's really how you bring your story to life. It's the experience you create, with your audience to bring your story to life. We'll dive into each one of these topics. So let's start here, right? What makes a steak great, right? In reality, if you're a steak lover, right, the origin of the meat, how it is cooked, how it is seasoned, all those things, right, make a steak great. Let's think about Investor Day content. What makes your content great? I wanted to focus on top 3 things. Number 1 is getting your main messaging right. Number 2, being very intentional with the agenda of your Investor Day. When I say agenda in number 2, it means who will present, what topics you will present on, right? Being very intentional with it. And number 3 is having a clear structure so that people remember, so your audience remembers your message. They really get what you're trying to say. Let's dive into the main message. So again, right, you are an IRO, you have an Investor Day a few months from now, you take out your pen and paper and you write down the 3 to 5 things that you really want your audience to walk away with. Maybe you have written down your main message. I want you to use these 3 tests, A, B, and C tests or exercises to really flush out your main message. If you haven't fully thought about your main message, right, you can use A, B, and C to help you create your main message. So the first thing I want us to ask is establishing the value of an investor day, right? Here, I want you to ask the question, why? Why you're doing this investor day? The way to think about this is, on some occasions, I've asked an IRO, right, why you're doing an investor day, and the answer is, hey, we haven't done one in 3 years, or hey, we do one every year. Those are not bad answers, but I really want us to be clear about why we are doing this investor day. For most companies, investor day, the reasons you do an investor day could be you have a new CEO or CFO, you have a new strategy, you are maybe going through a transformation and you want to really communicate that clearly. Or maybe you're firing on all cylinders and you have a story about momentum. Whatever it is, be very clear about the why for your investor day. Sometimes we have seen when the why is not clear and we start, figuring out the rest of the story, we often get distracted, right? You will be working with multiple leaders, multiple stakeholders. If the why is not clear, your story gets often distracted and then it misses the mark. So let's ask the question, why we are doing it? Let that inform your main message. Number two is what I like to call playing defense, is addressing perception gaps. Now, this is not new news, right? Every IRO understands, right? Hey, you want to have a good idea of your audience's analysts' perception gaps before your investor day. I think we all understand it. The opportunity here is being more deliberate, being more mindful of incorporating those perception gaps into your main message. That's where sometimes I think we miss the mark. We know the perception gaps, but they are not fully part of your main message or your story. The other reason you want to address perception gaps is your audience, your analysts will be attending the investor day because they have a few things in mind they want you to cover. If you are listening to their feedback, if you're answering to their gaps, then you're getting their buy-in, right? They feel that they are being listened to. So yeah, I think that's the opportunity, is just being more intentional. And then here's an example. If you want to score an A+, perhaps on your investor day, this is something one of our IROs did in a recent investor day. This was part of the CEO's opening section where she says, hey analysts, hey folks in the audience, we have listened to your feedback, and based on that, here is what we will be covering with you. So again, getting the attention of the audience in the room, making sure they are being listened to. The third thing is what I like to say is playing offense. You want to be mindful of your audience's gaps, play defense, but you also want to balance it with your own point of view, right? You also want to be heard. You also want to push your unique point of view, right? So play offense and defense in good balance. That's the idea here. I wanted to use an extreme example. This is from Tesla. We didn't help them with their investor day, but I feel like they do a really good job of pushing their unique point of view. If you think about their audience, Tesla's mission is they want to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. I don't think the analysts are asking for it, but Tesla does a good job of, always putting this front and center of their story. They make it about more than themselves, right? They make about their cause more than their company's cause. And that really helps kind of, painting that picture of Tesla where, wow, they are on a bigger mission. They are doing bigger, better things. They're constantly pushing their agenda. The other thing is, if you have unique insights about your industry, if you're really savvy about your strategy, you want to articulate that so that the audience knows, right, that, hey, this is a company run by savvy folks who really know, right, how to uniquely drive their business. So yeah, as you think about your main message, use these 3 tests to either flush out your main message or to help you create your main message, being very clear with your why, being very addressing your perception gaps, and then making sure you are also addressing your unique point of view. So as you do that, right, at the end of sort of this first step, you will end up with an initial idea of your main message for your Investor Day. Now let's move on to the second thing that can make a fantastic stay. Here, I want to focus our time on thinking about being very intentional with your agenda. Again, when I say agenda, I literally mean who will present, who will present on what topics to present. In the past, what I've seen, or in the past, right, we used to see more of like CEO starts out, CFO ends the Investor Day, segment leaders or business unit leaders, they present in the middle. That's fine. But I'm seeing a lot of creativity in the last couple of years with IROs getting very creative with their agenda. So the core point here is once you're very clear about your main message, use that to drive your agenda. Let's say there are 3 to 5 important things you want to cover in your main message. Those should then inform your agenda. You don't have to stick to CEO, segment leaders, and CFO. You drive the agenda based on whatever your main message requires. Let's use a couple examples to understand this further. Here's an example of a company, right? On the left, you can see this is their main message. If you zoom into one of their main messages, right, they are heavying up on a couple big growth initiatives to deliver their 3-year outlook, to deliver their 3-year strategic plan. And on the right, you can see they chose 2 leaders who may not be division leaders. These are more like experts, subject matter experts in terms of what they do. And they came on stage to really talk about topics here, which they would do the most justice with. So not relegating ourselves to just the default, but having the agenda, having the main message really drive who should speak based on who's best suitable to speak on those topics. Again, to your audience, right, it shows you're serious about those initiatives. You are walking the talk. Another example, in this example, this company on the left really wanted to talk about how they collaborate with their customers, right? How they lead in their category by delivering insights, unique insights to their customers. Something like this, they were not able to accommodate in their usual part of the Investor Day, right? So they had this 2-hour block, which was a slideshow. They were not able to go deep on this topic. So they got creative about figuring out a way to incorporate this beyond the 2-hour slideshow. So this was a hybrid event. 2-hour was a hybrid portion, but then there were some in-person, activities as well. And then they figured out a way to include this as part of immersion sessions. As part of this, they had analysts come to their collaboration center where they could literally touch and feel things, really understand how they activate insights with their customers. So the idea here is I'm seeing a lot of this across the board. Folks are getting very creative in terms of having people take a tour of their factory, taking tour of their innovation centers or collaboration centers to really go beyond slides and convey the points which are important to their storytelling and main messaging. And finally, when it comes to having a great steak for your Investor Day, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on having a great story structure. The idea here is, you have figured out your main message, you have figured out each of the topics, right, of your Investor Day. As you think about the story or the slides for each of these topics, how can you incorporate a clear structure? Sometimes we complicate things, and so I wanted to leave you with, an example on how you can keep things simple when it comes to the structure of your story. Again, why we do this is when you have a simple structure, your message is memorable. People remember, your audience will remember what you said and really really understand your message, right? So you want to make it memorable, you want to make it easy to understand by using structure. So let's take an example. By this time, right, you've figured out your main message and you've figured out your agenda for the Investor Day. Based on the agenda, you have different topics. So now the question is how you can bring clear structure to each of these topics. Here's one way to think about it. For each of your topics, think about 3 to 5 things, fewer the better, 3 to 5 things you want your audience to really walk away with. And then you want to have supporting slides for each of those topics. This might sound really simple, and it is. However, sometimes we overcomplicate, and so I thought, hey, I want to leave you with a suggestion on how to structure your presentations for each of your topics. So here's a real example. In this case, this client, this is their main message. Based on their main message, they figured out the agenda. Let's take one of the topics from the agenda. This is one of their business units. For this business unit, right, they focused on 3 topics. One, which was growth. This leader really wanted to talk about growth. 2, profitability. This was based on perception gap. Their audience wanted to really understand how this segment will grow their margin over a period of time. And finally, how this was also part of the perception gap. Number 3, how this company would invest in this segment. So yeah, these were the 3 things to cover. And then for each one of them, right, we had supporting slides to talk about growth, talk about profitability, and talk about investment. Fairly simple. This could be used as a handy way to structure your story for each of these topics. There you have it, the 3 essential ingredients of a steak. What can make your content great is nailing down your main message, being intentional with your agenda, and having clear structure. If you have done all of this, you will end up with a fantastic steak. Trust me, this steak is the most well-cooked, well-seasoned steak in the world. But the question is, would you still eat this steak? One of my designers, Scott, he created it, and he says, an audience also eats with their eyes, right? We also eat with our eyes. So while the steak is awesome, it's fantastic, it's not good enough. We have to still add the experience. We have to add the sizzle to make it appetizing so that the audience really enjoys it. So that's what we'll talk about next, how you can incorporate sizzle into your Investor Day presentation. So here's how to think about it. We have a steak with a great sizzle here. In order for your presentation to have the sizzle, there are 3 things you can do. One is make it visual. This is all about your slides, how you can make it visual, but in a very meaningful way. Second is how you can go beyond the slides, right? How you can make your Investor Day engaging, interesting, maybe a little bit of fun for your audience as well. And finally, how you can drive some in-person experiences, how you can make it experiential. Let's dive into each one of these. How can we make it visual? Now, we do talk a lot about visual presentations. We have done webinars where we talk about how to make it visual, how to design. I don't want to focus my time on how. Instead, I want to really focus on the why part here, why we should make it visual, what are we trying to achieve? And then hopefully we can figure out, right? You can figure out how you can go about that path. So making it visual, here are sort of 3 reasons why we want to make it visual. Number 1 is we really want to help you land your message, right? So let's take this example on the left. This company, this was their Investor Day a couple of years ago. They are talking about their capital allocation priorities. They are talking about how they have been allocating capital. They're showing some numbers from the recent past. But when we listen to the IRO, what they really wanted to convey here, they really wanted to convey like, hey, we have a capital allocation strategy and we are very clear about our priorities. So we went about this route, in terms of like 1, 2, and 3, these are the priorities. This is how we allocate capital. Over here, you're trying to do the same things, but you are sort of dancing around your main message. Over here, you are landing your message. right? So that's what we want to achieve by being visual. Next, why we want to make it visual is because we want to make the information easy to digest for your audience. Again, over here, you can be very smart in terms of your charts, your data visualization, how you convey your story through numbers. Again, a simple example here, this is a before version of an investor day. This company is talking about TAM. They're talking about how their addressable market is changing or expanding while they remain smaller. I think it works, but then we were like, hey, how can we simplify this further? How we can make it easy to digest, right? So this is the approach we took where, your company's size remains the same while your market is expanding and you're trying to say, hey, our markets are large and we still have a large opportunity to grow. So the reason you want to make it visual is not because we want pretty slides, but so that your audience immediately gets your message. Make it easy to digest for them. And finally, you want to make it visual because you want your audience to see things the way you see things. Let's say you're a presenter, you already have an image of what you are trying to say. Can you say that visually? Can you help your audience also see things the way you see? So here's an example of a before slide. This was a straw man, right? This was not a finished slide. It's just an idea from the IRO, right? This company uses M&A as a bolt-on in order to accelerate their growth. They are saying, yep, we will accelerate growth with M&A. This is some of our criteria when it comes to acquiring companies. Something like M&A, it's a little hard for the audience to visualize. These are potential targets. So in this case, right, the approach we took was, hey, these are some successful M&As by this company. If we show that to the audience, they will relate to the message. Oh yeah, this company has had some fantastic acquisitions. They will continue doing that. We want to accelerate. So we are trying to show literally some acceleration here. And these are the criteria when it comes to selecting targets. So again, right, you want to make it visual so folks can relate to you and see things the way you see. Next, let's talk about, next I wanted to just share some examples of visual, bold investor day presentations. Again, the goal in each of these cases is how you can make your audience relate to what you do, how you can be bold and visual, and then how you can get your message across, right? So these are just some examples of being visual. Next, I want to talk about how you can go beyond slides. So how you can make it a little engaging, right? Interactive, your investor day. So the goal here is, hey, during investor day, maybe you can interact with your audience and have a little bit of fun. Here's an example. This is a recent investor day. 30 minutes into the investor day, this is the slide portion of the presentation. The CEO has presented, the IRO has spoken, and you feel a little tense in the room. How can you break that up, right? So perhaps you can do some fun live polls to break things up. A little bit later, right? One more break, right? Maybe you can quiz your audience to make sure they are following you, they are with you, right? What are the things you can do so that you make this a little bit of fun, you ease the tension in the room, and then you get people to, be engaged during your investor day, right? You can even reward your analysts with some swags or gifts so they feel like they're being involved. So that's one way to bring engagement. And finally, I wanted to touch on how you can make it experiential. The idea here is, if you are doing in-person investor days, right, how can we foster in-person moments? Not everything can be conveyed on a slide. I think a lot of companies will say talent or culture is their unique advantage, but something like that is very hard to capture on a slide, right? So the idea is, how can you incorporate in-person moments, right? So that people really get to interact with your subject matter experts and get a feel for your company, right? So the idea is, here are some examples, right? Let's say you're talking about your innovation or your product or maybe a new capability, giving a demo to your audience is better than just presenting that on a slide, right? So if you can make them feel, if you can make them look at things, right, try things on their own, that's awesome. If you are in the food space, right, or if you're in any consumer space, if you can make your audience try your products, that's better than selling them, you know, how good it is, right? We also touched about this in the intentional agenda piece, right? If you can have your audiences come to your innovation center, touch and feel things, interact with your subject matter experts, that's a better way for them to remember your message versus just relying on the slideshow. So think about how you can make it experiential. So there you go. From a Steak and Sizzle perspective, here's how you can, you know, lean on steak, main message, agenda structure, and sizzle, being visual, making it engaging and experiential in order to get the most results, most impact for your investor day. I did want to share, here's a service that we do provide to public company IROs, to IROs who are decision makers. If you want to get ready for your investor days, or if you are thinking of, you know, upgrading your outreach presentations or your earnings presentation, you could sign up for a consulting session with me. The way it works is you could book 45 minutes on my calendar. Before that call, I would take a look at your presentation and be very ready in terms of actionable feedback for your story, your flow, your content, and your design. And when we meet, I'll walk you through these ideas that you can apply on your own. The goal here is that we want to give you an external set of eyes, and we want to get you ready for your next high stakes situation, right? Could it be a conference, or you're upgrading your outreach presentation, or you have an investor day in the works. So my team will share a link in the chat. You're welcome to block time with me and also kind of get to know each other better, you know, something like that. All right, so thank you all for participating. Feel free to reach out through my LinkedIn or through email as well.